I'll get started. Hello and a very warm welcome to this webinar on universities as partners in learning cities and communities. Just to introduce myself, my name is Leonie Wheeler and I'm the Honorary CEO of the Australian Learning Communities Network. I'm also a board member of Pascal and an associate of the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies at RMIT University. Thank you for being here and I'm delighted to be your MC for today's webinar. As you can see, we're recording this webinar and it will be sent out to those who have registered and available on the website. Acknowledgement to country. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we come today and where learning takes place across Australia and globally. I particularly acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the area I come from. I acknowledge the richness of our Aboriginal community members and what they bring to our lands across Australia and their learning that has been passed across generations for thousands of years. Now, I'd like to invite you to get on the chat and tell us where you're joining from, please. Next, I'd like to introduce you to our facilitators. We acknowledge the important support we receive from our members and co-organisers, Wollongong City Council and RMIT University, who have partnered with us to deliver this event as part of our commitment to support the Global Learning Festival. Firstly, Lara Pugh, Project Leader Learning City at Wollongong City Council, is coordinating this webinar and ensuring that everything works well. Supporting us is V. Bew, a student studying a Bachelor's in International Development at RMIT University. Australian Learning Community Network and Wyndham City Council are hosting V's placement this semester. V is adding important information to the chat and running a Menti activity. Finally, Robbie Guevara, Associate Professor in International Development at RMIT University, President of the International Council of Adult Education and a Pascal Director, will facilitate the panel discussion. I acknowledge and thank Lara, V and Robbie for their work. Now, as you will know, the aim of this roundtable is to explore the different ways that universities can support the development and implementation of learning cities and communities in their regions. And we're really thrilled to have representatives from universities and communities from Australia, the UK and Benin in Africa, who will share their experiences and insights on building sustainable long-term university partnerships, and most importantly, link these to the UN sustainability goals. Now, we'll have a warm-up activity first, and Lara is going to, and V are going to introduce this.
Hi everyone, my name's Lara and I'm based here in Wollongong on Dharawal country. Welcome to this event. I'm very pleased to have you here. We'd like to invite you now to answer a few questions that I've been asking myself since I started my role as a Learning City project coordinator. So can we put the questions up, V? Yeah, how can we leverage partnerships to benefit our communities? And again, benefit for all. Empowering our communities and affecting real world change, yeah. I like this idea of the analysis of needs and gaps in the community and sharing that work. I'm curious about research partnerships as well. Yes, and the idea of local impact tailored to local communities and local needs. Yeah. And together we can collaborate on projects that can break down barriers. Yeah, tools and methods for intergenerational e-skill learning. I think we've all realised in the last 2 years how important digital inclusion is. Translation of research into impact for communities at a local and global level by the look of it. And yes, encouraging lifelong learning connections. Leaving no one behind, yeah. Yeah, with COP26 underway, it's timely to focus on universities working with communities to solve this huge challenge. That's wonderful. Thank you. Was there another question, V?
Yes, there is. I'll just change it to the next slide there.
Fabulous. So this is imagining in your head, what does a successful university community partnership look like? So what does it mean for both actors or all actors in this situation? What does it look like to you? We might need the Q, or does that follow on? Oh, there we go. Ongoing learning, adaptable. Communication and localized campuses, yeah. Collaborative, I think, is important and respectful. Yeah, mutual. They talk about mutually beneficial activities when they talk about collective impact, which I agree with. Synergy, reciprocity, welcoming places, accessible, and the win-win. A win-win-win. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
I'm going to talk about one partnership that the Australian Learning Community Network has with Gwydir Shire. The Gwydir Shire is in north-west New South Wales, Australia, and covers an area of 9,122 square kilometres. It has a small number of towns and villages and a population of 5,258 people. There is no physical university or technical education presence. However, the Shire has been very forward-thinking over the last 16 years. For a start, it calls itself a learning region, Gwydir Learning Region. The Shire Council calls itself a learning organisation, so learning is at the heart. One of the projects was This Living Classroom, which has been in existence for 10 years. It took 370 acres or 150 hectares of diverse and degraded land and made it healthy and resilient. The objective has been to create a primary industries trade training centre and showcase ways and means to generate the soils to be healthier and more resilient to drought and pests, and to be more flexible in productive land use. Its aim is to be a place for visitors, education, tourism and conferencing. It has taken collaboration, so the kinds of things you talked about, and it's of course with the schools and universities, and the universities are not located in that place. And we see here at the bottom picture some students from the University of Queensland, landscape architect students, thinking about the types of reeds that can be built in the dam and productive land, and they came up with a whole lot of ideas that the council then took on board and are now doing. The top slide we can see school students, so it's a mecca for students to learn about local food miles and connecting with the UN SDGs about healthy and sustainable communities. So it takes learning as the basis, and even though a university is not located in that remote area of northwest New South Wales, universities are involved in coming up with creative ideas to help the local population. To me, that's a successful partnership, and we're going to hear a lot more about other successful partnerships as well. And I'm going to hand over to Robbie now, who will introduce the panel, and we'll get going on this webinar.
Just checking that you can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Something just happened to my slides, I think. Anyway, I'm not sure what you see, but hopefully you see the slide at the same time. So thank you, Leonie. Thank you, V, and thank you, Lara, for my partners in crime. When to be able to get you all here today at this particular time. So as introduced, my name is Robbie Guevara. I'm well officially part of RMIT University, but also if you're wondering what my background is, as I'm also the president of the International Council for Adult Education, and we've just launched earlier this year what we call a We Are ALE campaign, not ale to drink, but ALE as in adult learning and education. And I think part of what we're looking at today is the whole notion that how do we learn to partner more effectively? And I'm very pleased to be able to be with you today to be able to moderate this session. I acknowledge that I am on Wurundjeri people's land of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the unceded lands that RMIT University stands on, but also where I am at the moment at home in the city of Glen Eira. As a migrant to Australia, I think it's really important for me to acknowledge, and I am really humbled by the words that the chairperson of the Europe Justice Commission in Victoria, the state where I am from, that has started a truth-telling process for our First Peoples. And she said in this article just a few weeks ago, she said, regardless of circumstance, people who come here from other lands have another country where their languages, history, and social systems reside and thrive. And so for me, from the Philippines, this is very true. I come from the Philippines. In the Philippines, we do have issues of colonialism as well, but we do have language that thrive. We do have a culture that thrives, and that is not necessarily also true here in Australia for our First Peoples. So it's within this spirit of truth-telling by the First Peoples of this country that the aspiration for change that I respectfully acknowledge and recognize elders past, present, and emerging. And so with that, we would like, therefore, to invite our distinguished speakers. So I've got 5 speakers to introduce and facilitate today. Professor Bruce Wilson, a friend, a colleague, and another partner in other aspects of learning. Professor Idowu Biao from Benin. Dr. Mary Mahoney, who I have met previously. Also, she's Australian, but she's now at Wolverhampton in the UK, and new friends from Wollongong, who I hope to be able to meet soon, Mark Norman and Dr. Belinda Gibbons, and I will introduce them briefly as they are speaking with us this evening or this afternoon or this morning for you. Detailed introductions will be on the site in the chat box if you want to know more about them. But I'd like to start with first inviting Bruce. Bruce, in a way, will frame for us some of the issues in terms of universities as partners in learning cities and learning communities. So I'd like to welcome Professor Bruce Wilson in terms of giving you, Bruce, your 10 minutes to be able to engage us in these ideas of what universities as partners for learning cities. Thanks very much, Bruce.
Lara, you might need to unmute me.
You are unmuted. Oh, hang on, you were unmuted. Just a minute. Yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself, Bruce. You were unmuted just a moment ago.
How are we going? Okay?
Perfect. Yep. Loud and clear.
Thank you, everybody who's been involved in pulling together this event and this conversation, really. And those of you who are choosing to join it, I look forward to the exchange we'll have. Let me also begin by acknowledging that I sit in Melbourne in a place actually very close to Robbie. Even during lockdown, we were close enough to be able to to go for walks together, which was a real privilege. But I'd like to acknowledge in particular the Wollongong and Bunurong language groups, the traditional custodians of the land on which I spent a lot of my life, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Can we go to the first slide, please, V. And by way of introduction, I'd also like to acknowledge Ken Thompson, who has been a very good colleague to many of us. Ken was the first, and indeed the only, chair of the Hume Global Learning Village Committee, perhaps best understood as the operational body that did a lot of the thinking and the organising work for the Hume Global Learning Village from, the best part of 20 years ago until about 2013 or 14. Ken unfortunately died very recently. It's caused great distress to many people in our part of the world. Many people have commented to me on what an inspiration that Ken was, the work that he did to nurture learning communities, and part of what I'm seeking to do in our conversation and the ideas that we're engaging with is to honour Ken's legacy and to contribute in a very small way to continuing to share some of his thinking with all of you. Next slide, please, B. So our topic is, of course, about universities and as partners with learning cities. And of course, they are important learning partners. We offer formal programs that contribute to learning. We often are involved in collaborative research that addresses community and city issues. We have massive infrastructure, which is, on occasions at least, available for public use. We're important community actors in terms of the goods and services, the opportunities for housing and so on and so forth, and just our contribution as significant corporate citizens. And in many cases, at least, some of us are engaging in public debate and doing our best to contribute, whether it's through media coverage or other forms, to contribute to informal and non-formal learning as much as we do through our formal programs. But the question that has often occurred to me as a university academic for much of my life is, in whose interests is this work undertaken? And I've often used this very kind of schematic little set of alternatives at the bottom of the slide as a way of thinking about this. Is it inside out? Is it universities with our agendas, our expertise, our priorities, looking for ways to engage with people who might take advantage of our resources and hopefully we make a contribution in that way? Or is it outside in? To what extent are we making ourselves vulnerable and open to other people's priorities, other people's interests, other people's agendas? Where's the starting point? And what does that mean in terms of how effective universities are as partners? And let me say up front that I'm a very strong advocate. Indeed, a great deal of my work as an academic has in fact been outside in. It's been trying to listen and to engage with communities and understand what it is that they want rather than what I think is necessarily best for them. But if we can go to the next slide, V, please. This is not a matter of technical processes or doing things the right way. I believe very strongly that it's a cultural and political challenge that we all face. And one way that I like to posit the strength of this kind of challenge is to think about it in terms of our Prime Minister. I'm talking about Australia. I'm an Australian, but you might think of that in Benin or in the UK or somewhere else. At what point will we ever have a Prime Minister who actually articulates a vision for our nation as a learning society that puts learning at the heart of their agenda for all of us? Next slide, please, V. I'll be staggered if I see it in my lifetime, to be honest. But if it were to happen, if we were to succeed with this cultural and political transformation as I describe it, what would that mean for how tertiary institutions do become co-producers with government, industry and community? One of the first points I would say is that learning in the community is a starting point, not an afterthought. One of the projects that we undertook as part of the work in the Hume Global Learning Village a few years ago was exactly that. It was about trying to understand what did young people in particular learn outside school. Those who were perhaps captain of a local soccer team, involved in a dance group, perhaps part of an art class. We started on that project, was triggered by a couple of things, but one of the triggers was learning that a school had a very successful local sports person at their school, very highly respected in the community, and they had no idea about the kind of activities that he was involved in outside school. So that school, obviously not university, but the point's the same. What do we know about what our students, our community members are learning and engaging with on a daily basis? One of the points I'd like to add at this stage is that as I go through these various thoughts on this screen, none of it is easy. Co-production, academics working with government or with community, is not an easy thing. We speak different languages, we have different reward systems, we work to different time frames, and we sometimes have quite different orders of scale, quite different decision-making frameworks. Blending these things is not easy. That's why sometimes the SDGs, the UN Global Agenda, can be a very useful starting point for thinking about how universities do engage with other partners in addressing some of these challenges. They provide us with a language, they provide us with a document, a set of goals that have been endorsed by 193 nations around the world. It's not Bruce Wilson trying to think up something that would be a starting point. It's out there. How do we recognize it? How do we begin a conversation about it? There's a language there that we can use to start to have that conversation. One of the projects I was involved in with Mike Osborne, who I think has joined us here a decade or so ago, was looking exactly at this question about universities partnering with regional governments. And one of the things that I was struck by in Helsinki, where I had the privilege of joining a whole range of conversations with people there, was that the rectors, the vice chancellors, the leaders of the university met every 6 months with the mayor of Helsinki and the neighbouring cities. And they would, every 6 months, have a conversation about what were their priorities, what were their visions, what were their agendas for their community or city or region. How did these overlap? How did these connect so that the rectors could ensure that their universities were understanding, at least engaging with what the city leaders wanted? To the best of my knowledge, and I've certainly tried not only a couple of times to find this out, but to make it happen, that it's never happened in Victoria that our Premier and senior members of our cabinet have sat down with the 8 or 9 university vice chancellors and had that kind of conversation. Facilities that are shared with civil society rather than excluding them. Our campus, RMIT, is right at the heart of Melbourne City, Melbourne CBD, and we've got an enormous amount of property. It's a bit like Fort Knox getting into it, especially at the moment. COVID obviously is a particular kind of context, but even without COVID, the security issues predominate an agenda rather than thinking about how we can engage with local networks and bring them into the university. And finally, if my vision about a Prime Minister celebrating learning as at the heart of our society, we would understand learning to be a public good, something that we all have, we all engage in, we all contribute to, and we can all share. It's not about individual benefit. It's not about credentials. It's not about climbing ladders. It's about how we together spread our minds, spread our wings, and engage on those things that are at the heart of our society's agenda for growth and change. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Bruce. That was spot on. And I think we've fixed any of the, Lara, you've fixed the technical bit. People were not seeing the slides, but I think we've sorted that. So we're doing this practice and doing this dance. And so thank you very much for that. So what I'd like to do now, if there are any questions, thanks, Jack. Jack said we found RMIT University incredible in their open-heartedness to the work with Wyndham City Council. I guess the question I would have reflecting on that, Bruce, and in other words, what is it about RMIT, or is there a part of RMIT, or is it there something in the culture of RMIT? And I think yes, we've all come out of RMIT, Leonie, myself, but Bruce has been there much longer, and I think some of our colleagues are also here today. What is it? Is there something with RMIT that linked to the Global Learning Village, that linked to Wyndham City Council that you can think of while we look at any other questions from the speakers? Bruce.
I'm delighted that Jack has that experience, and I personally have benefited greatly from the conversations with Jack. I think that the RMIT, as many of you will know, began its life as the working man's college in 1887, and I think that commitment to application, to ideas with purpose rather than ideas as basic knowledge, is still an important part of the culture of RMIT, and it certainly lends itself to the kind of engagement that I hope Jack continues to benefit from. I've got to say, Jack, I suspect you're one of the lucky ones, and it's not because I don't have many outstanding colleagues right across the university, but institutionally, structurally, and even it comes back to that point I made about reward systems. For my sins, I was a dean at RMIT for the best part of a decade, and one of my struggles with my colleagues in the school was to try and shift in something of the direction that I've been talking about, and it's not an easy gig. I think that we all keep trying to encourage and move in that direction. One of the things I think is extraordinary about RMIT, and I won't go on about this, but it is a wonderful institution in terms of people. Many people at RMIT I have enormous respect for, learn from, laugh with. But it's a big place, and getting a big place to be agile and responsive and able to have the conversations in language which makes sense, not just to Jack, but to any person who comes knocking on the door, is a constant challenge.
Thanks, Bruce. And we don't have another question, but I'd like to be able to start this dynamic of a conversation. So I'm going to surprise Leonie. I'm going to put Leonie on the spot. When I first met Leonie at RMIT, she was managing a Northern Partnerships program. And so Leonie had this thing about between, this role that, yes, she was employed by the university in the School of Education, yet she was the one who introduced me to this idea of brokers. In other words, Leonie, how have you seen this? You've been at RMIT, outside of RMIT, you've sort of come back a bit now. How have you seen this nature, not just of RMIT, but the whole notion of partnerships with universities from that perspective? And you've also been in a university in Qatar. So, yes. Leonie, and then I'll go to our next speaker.
Thank you, Robbie. The notion of brokers was something we came up with when we were out at working in Hume City and with Ken in the Hume Global Learning Village. We very much saw that, in a way, universities could play that role, and so could local government. You need a neutral broker to actually collaborate or congregate the partnerships. I played that role in Qatar as well when I was helping Al Wakra become a learning city, again, advising them as a university player in a local college, advising them on what UNESCO learning cities were, what were the key features. So I used my expertise there, and that's what universities have. But we must listen. As a university player, you must listen also to, and you can learn a tremendous lot for the community. In my role as the Australian Learning Communities Network volunteer position, I work a lot with local governments like Wyndham and Wollongong, and again, it's listening to them, and then in my later years I can mentor them a bit, but they are dynamic and leading the way now in UN sustainability goals and how to link with that. So I hope that some of that work will link with the work of the university research as well. Plenty of opportunities.
Thanks, Leonie. So I'd like to say thanks to Bruce for framing our conversations at the start. And I'll invite Bruce again to come back towards the end as we listen to. And I think by framing it, what we've done is we've actually therefore allowed and our following speakers will have to begin to start addressing some of the issues that you've heard. Like universities are often focused on the formal, and that's what people think. You just do degrees. But actually, we do, as Bruce said, we do more than degrees. We do more than degrees, but often this side becomes very invisible, the informal and the non-formal. And as Bruce phrased it, the inside out or the outside in. So in a way, I'd like to keep that dynamic. As we listen to our next speakers with their own particular stories, what Bruce has done is actually focused on how this partnership happens in this kind of inside out, outside in, formal, informal, exploring these tensions. And I'd like to invite the Professor Idu Biao from Benin. And Idu comes from us from a very particular context. I think while RMIT is known as an urban university, okay, Idu joins us. That's focused on, from my understanding, a different kind of learning cities that focuses a bit more in terms of the agricultural side. I wouldn't, maybe more rural, and we'd find out more from Idu. But at the same time, this is when I went to University of the Philippines at Los Baños, we were the agricultural campus. We were the poor brothers and sisters who were going to do farming. Okay, but there's something about the character also, depending on the country, of agricultural universities that provide a certain a dynamic of links to this community. And so I'd like to welcome Idu to present with us today. We have your slide, Idu, and I hope the people who are watching can see the slides. And you have your 10 minutes, Professor, now.
Thank you.
Okay,
Roberto.
there we go. Welcome.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Good. Allow me to stand on the existing protocol. And I'm talking to you today about the situation in Africa generally, although I'm talking from West Africa and specifically from Benin. It is the university and community engagement. Next slide. Now I give you a bit of background. Learning in Africa generally, learning within the context of modernization and globalization is not a big industry. Learning takes place anyway, whether we like it or not. But you see, my talk will be learning within the context of modernization and globalization. It isn't a big industry here. And also the speed of change is not as fast as it obtains on the global scene in Europe and in the developed country. So that is why we have the two situations I'm going to describe now. The first situation is an engagement that the University of Calavi in the eastern part of Nigeria had with a small community living in a town. The second will address another situation now in Cotonou, in the Republic of Benin. The background is that Calavi used to be a rural area, a very small city, before 2005, when we had a governor who decided to change the city completely. Then there were communities within the community, within the city of Calavi, that did not understand what was going on, what was going to happen to the city. And they carried on living their very slow and very sleepy kind of life. And therefore, with the progress of the modernized city, they were being left behind. So the university thought that they should intervene in order to bring these people on board. The same thing happened in Cotonou. In Cotonou, in Benin, for almost 20 years, there was this socialist government that promoted welfarist attitude of life. But then from the year 1992 already, the tone of the country has changed, and now you have democratic capitalist government that are promoting more of entrepreneurial style of life. And people are not able to key in as fast as they should. Therefore, the university thought that they should intervene in order to bring people up to the level, up to the speed of the two cities. Next slide. Therefore, in Calabar, we have to devise programs. Briefly, Calabar is a town in Nigeria. Cotonou is a town in Benin. And Cotonou is the commercial capital of Benin. Calabar is the capital of Cross River State. Calabar has about 13,000 inhabitants, while Cotonou has about the same, 698,000 inhabitants. Next slide. What were the objectives of the program, the specific objective of the program? Is to include a small community, a Hausa community we call them, into the train, the moving train of Calabar, which is changing fast in terms of modernization. It is also to bring on board the lower social groups in terms of economic activities, economic understanding of the economic workings of a city in Cotonou. Next slide. What were the specific learning programs that were designed to achieve those objectives? First of all, in Calabar, we had to bring to the notice of the Hausa people who are not indigenous of Calabar itself, a social study package of the town, Calabar. That is the origin of Calabar, the languages, the taboo, the customs, and compare them with the origin and the element from where the Hausa people come. We also talked about the socio-political realities currently in Calabar, and we also talked about the survival skills of this group of people who are not from Calabar. In Cotonou, we gave a brief history of Cotonou. We gave a difference between a welfare state and a capitalist state, and we are able also to teach survival skills within a fast-moving within a Cotonou, which is changing from a welfareist position to a capitalist and entrepreneurial position. Next slide. It took us some time. How did we identify those groups that the university focused on? We had noticed what is happening. We had to conduct what we call neighborhood surveys in order to identify the groups that will be most impacted, the vulnerable groups as we call them. We discussed the result of the survey with the councils of each of the cities, and we entered into partnership with the councils so that they could come and support us. We went to the communities we identified and had focus group discussion with them in order to tell them our purpose and so on. And having agreed, we ran a 12-week reorientation and skills acquisition program with them in order to impact the curriculum, the objectives we had set, which we discussed earlier. Next slide. Well, how did we go about it? We first of all began explaining the concept and purpose of the project. We invited members of the two communities we identified to enroll themselves in the program we'll do later. And we got about 16 women in Calabar and 18 women and 3 men in the case of Cotonou. Next. The program, the 12-week programs were run, and we had to evaluate. How did we evaluate the effectiveness of the program? How did we evaluate what we achieved in the program? We asked the participants to report whatever they felt. And we also commissioned we commissioned a few colleagues to also observe and give us their impressions. The findings were that in self-report, 66% in Calabar and 71% in Cotonou self-reported positive change through successful participation into the program. But when we talked to our colleagues that were only observing, they thought that in Calabar, instead of 66%, they discovered 58% of positive change and 69% of positive change in Cotonou. The two of them are a little lower than what the participants themselves reported, but the two reports were, of course, far above average. Next. Thank you for listening.
Spot on, Professor. 10 minutes.
Okay. Thanks.
Now, there are a number of questions that I think it's wonderful to see questions, and it's wonderful to see other people answer questions. So thank you, Sarah. I think Sarah started to answer the question of Diane. So that's a conversation. They're having a separate conversation in the chat, which is wonderful, I think, really. But at the same time, I think, yeah, so if the other speakers also, I invite you, please, maybe after you've spoken, to look at the chat and feel free to respond. But I just want to be able to just mirror back to Professor Idu. I guess if you start to look at it, when you look at the inside out and outside in, I like your story about this whole notion that we were starting to see that the community or the city was changing. There was a need for modernization, the entrepreneurial spirit. So the university therefore came in and said, how can we help and ensure that the people are not left behind, which is what the SDGs basically is now saying. So in a way, when we think of Bruce's inside out and outside in, I often talk about this in terms of like a dance in terms of who's leading and who's following. Okay, I usually ask my students to be able to do this as an activity, and sometimes you're able to realize that in terms of partnership, often the formal institutions might often be seen as the leaders. But at the same time, if you start to observe it really very much, you'll start to see that it's moving very slowly, and they're actually then in rhythm with each other. Is Lara wanting to ask a question,
yes.
or tell me to stop talking?
No, well, we have a question from, no. We have a question from Emily.
Okay, good.
Professor Biao, did you find any unexpected barriers to getting these programs off and running? Were there any barriers?
And how did you navigate them? Was the follow-up question.
Okay. Well, in the two cases, the only barriers were material. But what we found in the two cases, there was this enthusiasm by the councils themselves to get people on board, to get everybody to follow the change. You know, it's like the new government, the councils are trying to change or to promote modernization, to advance society as it were. And they are glad. They are glad to see people who can help them to get everybody to follow, to fall in the one. However, we needed a little more material, a little more finances than we were able to access. That would be the only obstacle.
And how did you overcome it?
We, in Calabar, well, I didn't give this time something. In Calabar, we were able to overcome it when we went out for the second and third event. The Cotonou one is a new one. It's actually started in 2021 and we are not completed. In Calabar, we were able to access a small fund from actually the University of Glasgow in order to be able to rerun the program the second time. Because that one happened during the first decade of 20-something. That was in 2009. So we had a rerun. So we actually accessed a small fund in order to mitigate the earlier challenges there. In Cotonou, we are just being confronted with that now, and we are trying to think around it. I'm sure we are going to apply the same thing, the same strategy we applied in Calabar.
And last question, Professor Idu, Mary, our next speaker is asking, can you please talk to us, understand what represented positive change? What for you was positive change? Because the interesting thing, you said there was positive change from the participants, the community, but also positive change from the university observers. So they had different perspectives, but they both, was it exactly the same positive change?
What was self-reported, what the participants said, is that they were able to now, it's like a flood of lights that came into their consciousness. They were not really aware that the cities were changing as much as we discussed. So it's like the discussions brought illumination into them, greater understanding of the environment within which they were living. And they were therefore able to understand why, for instance, the heap of tomato or the heap of onions started costing a little higher than it did about 5 months ago. So they had that flash of understanding. They were able to link their something that was happening to them, which they did not understand well, to our interaction with them. They now got convinced that yes, a change was happening, and they could see, for instance, in the cost of tomato here, in the cost of how people now park their cars, even by the roadside, which seems to be a little different than from what used to happen a few months ago or a year ago. So there is that illumination, what Paulo Freire will call conscientization. But then, at the level of the observers who were from the university, I think they were more expectant of greater change in behavior. You know, they expected, for instance, those communities to behave neatly differently from what they used to be, which is actually not realistic. The change could not be that big. So as far as I, the leader of the project, was concerned, I think the self-reporting was more realistic and more acceptable to me than the expectations of the colleagues in the university. The observation was that they needed, and now I also understood why they scored the percentage lower than what we got with self-reporting. They wanted to see greater change than was reported by participants.
Thank you, Professor Idu. There's another question, but we'll pause and maybe you can answer it in the chat. I'd like to now invite Mary to be able to speak to us now, because again, Mary, she'll explain, is in an interesting position. She works for the university, but it's like people ask when I first met Mary, so what hat do you wear? Where are you located? Yes, Dr. Mahoney. Yes. So in other words, the doctor says the university bit, but when you speak to Mary, and when we were walking around Wolverhampton, I saw people waving to her, just around around the city. So you think, oh, are you running for mayor? And all that. And so I think part of that is this, when Edu talked about, look, the perspective. Sometimes you think, oh, we want great change, but sometimes I think your story, Professor, of that aha, that they realize, at least now I understand why the price of onion is higher, and therefore what are the implications of this, and therefore this is the kind of change that happens to us for us to understand, but also how do we therefore initiate change that's positive. So I'd like to welcome Mary all the way from Wolverhampton to speak to us about their experience at Wolverhampton. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks very much, everyone. And I'm Mary Mahoney, and as it indicates there, I'm speaking on behalf of the Wolverhampton Learning City. So we're Wolverhampton City Learning Region because we believe it's where people live and work, not just simply the governance boundaries of Wolverhampton City Council, which determines our learning city. I'm speaking on behalf of my current role at the University of Wolverhampton as Director of Access and Lifelong Learning, and the creation of a Lifelong Learning Centre within the university, and in my role as a kind of coordinator, developer of the Learning City activities, but also as an individual who's passionate about learning cities and healthy cities. And my background is in healthy cities, really, rather than learning cities as such, where I learnt the value of understanding the link between learning and the social determinants of health. So I've had a very privileged position in coming to work at Wolverhampton, and it's just got better and better since I started. I'm originally from Bothwell in Tasmania, and I often wonder how I've ended up in Wolverhampton. But it's been an interesting journey. Next slide, please. There. Thank you. So I'm gonna have to I'm going to have to move you quite quickly because I have a lot of slides. So I'm using metaphor or analogy and colourful photos to help bring our story alive. So I'm using the analogy of the patchwork quilt to tell our story, because it simplifies the nature of the university's role into three different elements. In Wolverhampton City Learning Region, each learning provider in this analogy or community partner that is involved has their own pattern, and with very similar but yet different elements in our patchwork quilt, as you can see there. It's a similar picture, but it's very different if you look at each square. These come together through a structured process to create an entity, in this case a quilt, and in our case a learning city that symbolises the unity of all of us with a common purpose around creating learning and putting learning at the heart of our city. So for the University of Wolverhampton, and that's I think the lead on this, what's the role of universities in supporting, etc. I think for the university we're both part of the picture and a key player in the construction of the quilt, in this case the learning city region, and the story gets more complicated. So let's look at the first of these. How is the university a provider? So as I've said, I'm involved in lifelong learning. Wolverhampton is a really disadvantaged community, but the university is based in multiple locations. It has three main campuses, and in each place we are an anchor institution in that place. We work in partnership in every place to transform lives. We work with local authorities, with the devolved government models that they have in the UK, with the local enterprise partnerships, with chambers of commerce, etc., to build our position as an equal partner around the table to help those places transform. Our motto is the University of Opportunity, and one of the core strands of delivering that promise to people is through lifelong learning. And we also crucially understand the role of learning in place and why place is so important. So whilst we are in multiple locations, in every location, that place understands itself very, very differently. Next slide, please. So as an example, here we have put university in the heart of the community. So in 2015, we created our first regional learning centre in the heart of the new development of Telford. Previously, its town centre had been a shopping centre, and this new building, the South Water building, brought together a library, social space, community services through the local authority and the university in partnership with the local authority and further education colleges. Next slide. In 2017, we moved the same model into the town centre of Stafford, which had recently lost its university and had lost learning at the heart of it. So we put in a small regional learning centre in Stafford, and it's growing from strength to strength. Next slide, please. In 2020, we created a partnership, a very different regional learning centre in partnership with the Black Country Living Museum, a historical community-based program in the outskirts of Wolverhampton, where we're bringing the tradition and heritage of the Black Country, which is for local authorities, to life, and the university provides the conduit for the activity that happens through it in the learning context. Next slide, please. And the last one is in 2017, we started to think very, very carefully about the way in which we could operate in Wolverhampton. The university, as I said, is an anchor institution with the NHS, with other agencies like the Further Education College, the Big Housing Association, etc. And so we all came together and have been working very, very solidly to create a very clear model of the need to put learning at the heart of what is a very disadvantaged community. So whilst there's a university campus, it doesn't really mean anything to residents. They may work there, they may never visit that site, even though it's right in the heart of the town. So this becomes our equivalent of another learning centre where we're taking learning to the community and representing some of these changes. So this embodies, I think, the first element, which is the university is a university in its place. It plays an equal role alongside others. The key principles of what we seek to do in these locations are shown in the next couple of slides. V, if you wouldn't mind, please. So we position learning in every aspect of community activity by working with relevant partners. And here's just some examples of the sorts of ways that we operate. We work in partnership and we try and provide relevance in that location. Next slide, please. We clearly, from our photographs, also try to create progression opportunities between each of the different learning partners. So we try and break down any barriers to learning that people might have. We have many first in family. We bring in all sorts of opportunities to break down barriers, including knitting groups and dancing classes. And this is quite unusual for higher education, as you can imagine. And we try and make learning fun, and we try and engage across the lifespan, and we do intergenerational learning. Next slide, please. And we're also seeking to move our learning from informal or non-formal learning into formal. And so we offer qualifications or top-ups from a previous qualification, and we offer professional training qualifications in our own locations. So, and the last one, please, in relation to our activities, clearly, unsurprisingly, in the Learning City context, we run festivals. We try and bring together all parties, and there is a really strong history of lifelong learning across Wolverhampton, not necessarily in the other locations, but in Wolverhampton, this is really crucial, where we are able to make learning fun in public places. So in the second level, if you wouldn't mind changing V, please. We are a core partner, obviously, in the creation of the whole concept of learning communities, learning cities. So in Wolverhampton, we and the City Council are the main drivers, but you can see there are a whole series of complex partnerships, and this is what our patchwork quilt looks like. We have core learning providers, so Adult Education Wolverhampton, the Wolverhampton Learning Partnership and Learning Platform, and the Learning Communities bring together all the learning community providers based in our community, and the City Council also supports through learning opportunities centrally, as well as the Further Education College. So we have a core partnership team, and then we work work enormously successfully with people like Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club and its foundation, U3A, all sorts of wonderful organisations who come together in the context of festivals and activities. Next slide, please. But therein lies the complexity of our story. So in making the quilt, we have runs on the board because we have credibility with our partners, obviously, because we work with them, because we're a learning provider in our own right, and we have a place at the table to represent that. But then the power dynamic has to change, because we're also helping make the quilt, aren't we? We're driving that agenda, and we're mindful of that process. So in addition to Bruce's comments around outside in and inside out, I think there's in as well, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be in it as well as help make and shape it, and at times that causes some tensions. So the City Council provides a governance framework for us. It provides the vision and the strategic positioning, and we have enormous mayoral support for the UNESCO model of a learning city, whereas the university's role is very much around the collaborator, understanding our privileged place, providing expertise and innovation, particularly through lifelong learning, but also trying to act as a catalyst, bringing new thinking to the agenda, and obviously bringing some of the capital that's required through the employment of Natalie Lewis, our wonderful Learning Regions Coordinator. So we play a very different role in that respect, and it's a very fine line of moving along. The imperatives for the university, this is on the previous slide, but it doesn't matter, don't bother about going back. The imperatives for the university are that it is vital for it as an institution and its growth and development to prioritise learning for its economic and social goals, because Wolverhampton is disadvantaged. It is great for everybody if we can put learning at the heart of that social and economic development. But externally, there's the Civic Universities mission in the UK. There's also a new knowledge exchange framework, which is the third metric that universities are measured by, which is putting public and community engagement and knowledge exchange together for the first time. There's a national driver for place and the regional locations of place and their different needs, particularly in the pandemic. And the last one is Brexit and the impact of us moving out of Europe into our own skill shortage world, etc. So there are big drivers that position us as well. And the last slide, please. And that is the complexity. If I haven't told a complex enough story now, the two main things that we really struggle with is the complexity of the partnership, particularly post-pandemic, where community learning providers are struggling to find funding to operate differently, and that puts enormous pressure on them. So sometimes their reasons for working aren't as kind of altruistic as they used to be, because they're struggling to survive, and we have to acknowledge and support that. And the last, I think, is something we're all struggling with, and that is the Sustainable Development Goals often sit external to any kind of embedded nature, because they sit within our story, but they also, there is also this constant drive to become a smart city because we might get funding, or a city of culture because we might get funding, and that breaks down this ability for integrated working. But we're on the right pathway. So that's the end of my story. Hopefully you've got a stronger sense of both what the University of Wolverhampton represents, but also the way in which it comes together.
Thanks, Mary. You've generated so much questions, but I think you picked up one of the questions on priority learning areas and the link to market considerations, because you talked about that. But I think one of the earlier questions is evaluation frameworks for different engagements. Is there a different evaluation frameworks because of the variety and complexity of the engagements that you have, as perhaps it links back to an earlier question, really, in terms of sustainability, for example?
Yes, certainly. Obviously, each element of our quilt is being evaluated separately. So each of the providers evaluates their work, and then every strand of my own department's work is evaluated separately. And then as it all comes together, we are, because we're a UNESCO member of the UNESCO Learning City Network, we provide our reports every couple of years to them about the progress of the totality of this. Is that sufficient, Robbie, to pull that together? Yep.
Okay. And there's some, again, I invite you all to go into the chat, the speakers, to be able to respond to some of the questions. Mary, there are two other questions there that you might want to respond to. And Professor Edu, I think, thanks, Mike. Mike found a case study link about a description of the Calabar project that Professor Edu talked about. And so thanks very much, Mike, for helping out. Okay, and so I wouldn't say our final, but in other words, our final conversation really, and it's really good to have both Mark and Belinda here today representing two sides of the coin. Okay, I think Bruce, Edu, and Mary were all trying to say my left foot and my right foot, my inside and my outside, and all that. But here we have the inside and the outside and the outside and the inside with Mark and Belinda, both representing the city of Wollongong, the University of Wollongong, and I'll start with Mark as the librarian. But what I found interesting in Mark's introduction is the libraries are driving a whole of council citywide initiative as a learning city. So in other words, it's not just the universities that's driving it. Maybe that's the question: who's driving it? But the libraries are driving it. So I'd like to welcome Mark for your 10 minutes. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much, Robbie. So I'm the manager of Wollongong City Libraries, and really privileged to be here tonight with you all. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of Dharawal country, the land on which I live and work. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and those emerging. And I extend my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be present here today. So as Robbie said, Wollongong City Libraries is driving this innovative project to establish Wollongong as a UNESCO accredited learning city that promotes lifelong learning for all by 2024. And we really see the University of Wollongong as an important partner in this journey. Next slide, please, V. So just quickly, some background. Wollongong was first inhabited by the Dharawal people. It's a local government area, about 80 kilometres south of Sydney. It's the 4th largest city in New South Wales, the 9th largest in Australia. And it's bordered by an escarpment to the west, the ocean to the east, a national park to the north, and Lake Illawarra to the south. There are 7 libraries serving the population of Wollongong of about 290,000 people. And the first library was opened in 1876. The New South Wales Library Act of 1939 enshrined in law that residents were entitled to free library membership, free access to library collections, and free delivery of library materials to members of the community who were unwell or disabled and couldn't go to one of our libraries. Wollongong's home to a diverse and multicultural community. Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people represent about 3% of the total population. About 20% of the community were born overseas. Around 80% of the population only speak English at home. 58% of the population have no qualifications. 22% have a vocational qualification, and about 20% have a university qualification. Our unemployment rate is about 7%. And Wollongong has an ageing population with consistent growth in the proportion of people aged over 50. I'm a bit worried that means I'm an ageing population member. Wollongong 2028 is our community strategic plan, formulated with strong consultation with the community, and it identifies 10 key issues and challenges facing us over the next 10 years. These include economy, population growth, climate change, of course, renewal of our infrastructure, and in response to the discussion paper, the community identified similar challenges: financial sustainability, population growth, climate change, renewable energy, and our ageing population, and affordable housing. Next slide, please, V. The libraries play a core role in delivering on Wollongong City Council's commitment to creating a community that's informed, engaged, creative, and connected. And our strategy sets out a clear vision to inspire reading, lifelong learning, creativity, and inclusion in the community, with deliverables including develop and deliver training and educational programs to meet diverse community needs. And we offer a broad range of community learning events, activities, and resources similar to the ones Mary was talking about. And before COVID, we were delivering about 1,800 programs across the libraries and had around 22,000 people attending these every year. Just for an example, Wriggle and Jiggle supports early literacy development for preschoolers. Studiosity is a free 24/7 online tutoring service for high school students and early tertiary level students. Aboriginal Artist in Residence encourages residents to chat with local Aboriginal artists while they demonstrate their creative talents. Library After Hours, it's a free program for families living with autism or other sensory needs, which include a range of fun activities and borrowing and getting people into the library and feeling comfortable. Queer Stories promotes Australia's first LGBTQIA+ storytellers for a night of queer stories, unexpected tales, pride, prejudice, love and humour. And it's been so popular that we're offering this program at least twice a year now. Yarning circles offer residents the opportunity to participate in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander practice of speaking and listening from the heart. And Tech Savvy for Seniors offers programs and resources for older people to learn how to bridge the digital divide and how to use their computers, tablets and mobile phones. The libraries take great pride in its efforts to promote diversity, inclusion, belonging through its community learning events and programs and resources. And I really do believe that libraries change lives. Next slide, please, V. So you can see from this diagram that we're taking our commitment to lifelong learning to the next level by driving a whole of council citywide project to establish Wollongong as a UNESCO accredited city by 2024. The project has 3 phases and being led by our project leader, Lara, who you've met already, and she was appointed in March this year. Phase 1 focuses on internal engagement and commitment within the council. The second phase prioritises external engagement and input from the community. And the final phase culminates in the establishment of cross-sector steering committees that will develop and implement the Learning City agenda for Wollongong. The project directly addresses 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals: quality education, sustainable cities and communities, and partnerships for the goals. Next slide, please, V. Thank you. So the Learning City project is adopting a collective impact approach, bringing together cross-sector stakeholders and leaders to accomplish a population-wide outcome. The libraries are playing a key role as the backbone, if you like, driving the development of a shared Learning City agenda and providing ongoing logistical support. And we're currently in the process of laying the foundations of a Learning City and plan to bring Wollongong City Council, local education stakeholders, targeted community groups and members of private and not-for-profit sector and the broader population on what we hope will be a 4-year journey. As you can see from this image, the ultimate aim of the Learning City project is to connect parts to create a whole, exemplifying the saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We hope to establish a Learning City steering committee with representatives from local government, the private sector, government departments and agencies and not-for-profits. And by pooling our knowledge and resources, we hope we can work together to solve complex problems through lifelong learning initiatives. The Learning City project sees the University of Wollongong as a critical stakeholder in this collective impact approach. We commenced engagement with the University of Wollongong and we identified 2 potential areas of alignment: the 2020 to 2025 education strategy and the civic university strategy. And goal 1 includes an objective to deliver an integrated portfolio of educational opportunities that enable lifelong learning. And this involves developing and delivering a suite of lifelong learning activities that meet the needs of the community and the UOW alumni. And goal 3 includes 2 relevant objectives. One's to drive equitable access and participation in tertiary education for all. And the second is support and champion programs led by the university and our community partners that promote inclusivity, equity, diversity, ethics, reconciliation and human dignity. At this stage of the project, our libraries and the university have a verbal understanding in place that the Learning City project aligns well with both our goals and objectives around using lifelong learning to make a difference in the Wollongong community. Next slide, please, V. So, how's Wollongong City Council and University of Wollongong working together through a Learning City project? One way is that we're working together by collaborating on learning events, and some of them are similar to what those Mary was talking about. Let's start with this festival. Belinda and I are participating in this global roundtable tonight about the role that universities can play in learning cities, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you tonight, Belinda. And recently, Council was invited to collaborate with UOW on the Global Climate Change Week through the Learning City project. Council offered 2 activities at the Botanic Gardens, hosted 3 online events, and participated in 1 university panel discussion. And feedback on this collaboration indicates that there are benefits to working together around important matters such as climate change. And this is a prime example of a university community partnership working towards a Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action. Before COVID-19, the libraries ran an annual Comic Gong event. And this event celebrated cosplay, gaming, comics, robotics, and animation. And we attracted over 10,000 people each year. And the libraries partnered with the university's Early Start Discovery Space, a hands-on children's museum, to join with us at Comic Gong. And we hope to partner again with them for Comic Gong 22. Fingers crossed that we will be able to offer that live and for real. Next slide, please, V. So as we establish ourselves as a UNESCO Learning City, there are many opportunities for the university to collaborate with Council. And for the Learning City perspective, we can work together to meet the diverse needs of our community and achieve the goals of our community strategic plan, Sustainable Wollongong 2030, and supporting documents such as our Reconciliation Action Plan. For example, in response to COVID-19 pandemic, Wollongong City Libraries would be open to collaborating with the university on health literacy and digital inclusion programs for vulnerable members of our community. And in addition to aligning with organisation goals, we work well in partnership towards the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. We're grateful to have UOW as partners at this early stage of the Learning City project. We're really excited that Council has given us the challenge to lead this project on behalf of Council, and we look forward to fostering an effective working relationship with them in the few years to come. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'll pause from the questions to transition into the other side of the same coin, as basically Mark introduced. They're happy to partner with the University of Wollongong, and I'd like to welcome the Deputy Associate Dean Education for the Faculty of Business and Law at the University of Wollongong, who will also highlight as one of her passions embedding the SDGs. So I'd like to welcome Belinda. Thanks, Belinda, for your presentation today. You have your 10 minutes.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Mark. I join you on beautiful Darawal country, and I absolutely love living and working in our region. I live with my 2 girls, a COVID puppy and a COVID kitten, and I am honoured to share some stories today. And while I am sharing these stories, I cannot create a narrative without so many people. And so I thank everyone, not only at Wollongong Council, but in the many, many different sectors that I collaborate and create these stories with. So thank you. Next slide, please, V. So the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are, as we all know, a call to action to ensure we tackle the world's most pressing challenges, to ensure we have a healthy planet, a healthy society, and a healthy economy. Sustainable Development Goal 17 partnerships might be the most important of all Sustainable Development Goals, mainly because all the rest depend on it, and we cannot achieve the rest without partnerships. So in order to reach these global goals and the challenges within them, we need government, the private sector, academics, universities, and our community to work together. These challenges are borderless and they do not discriminate. Many of them we are currently living with, and many of them are quite slow creeping and will be upon us within our lifetimes, and definitely within our children's lifetimes. So for universities, this means all we do across education, practice and research has to involve different sectors. Next slide, please, V. So we need a fundamental shift in, sorry, you can go up. Sorry, V. I've got too many animations for V. You can just go back to the first slide, V. Thanks. So we need a fundamental shift in the way we think, plan, fund and work across sectors at the local level to create these university learning city partnerships. And we need to put, and the SDGs provide us with a common lens through which we can see the world and a platform for engagement. So while my research space is responsible management education and sustainable decision making, and I technically live in the Faculty of Business and Law, I could easily put myself and my interests solely in Sustainable Development Goal 4, education, and 8, decent work and economic growth. But to be honest, I find myself working across so many more. I found a relationship with someone in Sustainable Development 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. That then led me to work with someone on Zero Hunger, and that then led me to work in health, and that led me to work in reducing inequalities. And so we kind of live in a time where we need to pull ourselves out of our discipline and understand our purpose more and where we can create impact. Next slide, please, V. When I started working with the Sustainable Development Goals, I knew I had to involve other sectors. So I initially found an ally in Healthy Cities Illawarra, a not-for-profit organisation in Wollongong, and they were aligning as they align with the World Health Organization, and they were working with the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And we were working together and we were asking lots of questions, and we thought we might hold a workshop in our region to see who else was interested in this space. And so we thought we might get about 20 people, and I had some money in a teaching and learning account, and Healthy Cities Illawarra had some money, and we thought, well, we'll just combine and hold a bit of a breakfast and reach out to all our networks and just see who is interested in having this conversation. And when we first opened the registrations, we had about 120 people in about 2 hours, and we were just blown away with the different sectors that were really interested in this space. And not only that, but I guess we found a common area of interest. It wasn't just on one topic, it was the platform and the framework that was bringing us together. Next slide, please, V. So with 120 people, no one got breakfast, but that was okay. We found that everyone wanted to know a bit more, so we ended up having a second workshop and doing a bit of a deep dive, and we ran a World Cafe methodology style, and that particular event was held at the Wollongong City Council offices. So I think it's really important too that when we're collaborating with different sectors, that not only are things held at the universities, but they're also held at these gorgeous partners that we're collaborating with. Next slide, please, V. This then led to a research collaboration, which was some money was provided through our Global Challenges grant at the university, and we started researching intersectoral multi-stakeholder partnerships. And so we were exploring local intersectoral multi-stakeholder partnerships and the enablers and barriers towards them. And we were actually an intersectoral multi-stakeholder partnerships ourselves. So we had still partnering with Healthy Cities Illawarra. That then led to a relationship with the 4 different councils in our region. And so we had the 4 councils on that research. We then wanted to bring the voice of youth in. So we reached out to our scouts, local scout organisation, and we had a private sector partner as well in that particular group. What was really interesting was that we had to find the purpose of why we were coming together. So the purpose just wasn't to research. Why does KPMG want to understand more about intersectoral multi-stakeholder partnerships? What was the shared reason that we would come together and work together? what would the council get out of this? What are their key performance indicators and how are they measured and how does that help them? And so each of us, as we were exploring this particular research area, really understood more about why we were there, and it's still going. It's such a lovely relationship. Next slide, please, Bea. And the last, I guess, for me is also education is extremely important. And I collaborate with a number of different sectors on the Act for Sustainable Development Goals Student Challenge that we hold annually. And they're just a couple of pictures that we've held over the years that we were face-to-face and the year that we were online. And I guess for me, I wanted to pinpoint, for me, education is not just about bringing community and different sectors into our classrooms, but I feel our community and our different sectors also hold some responsibility for the learning that's happening in our regions. So they're not just guests that come and go. They design these courses with us. And so I think that's really important from a learning perspective, that we are all learning together and all responsible for not only the graduates that we create, but the citizens that exist and live in our communities. Next slide, please, Bea. So I guess just a couple of challenges that I just wanted to pinpoint is one, again, around shared value, this transparency that must exist in these collaborative relationships, and to understand the equal benefits, work out the why. Why are these people in this collaboration with you? One example for me is if we are working on a piece of work and we're writing together, then all our names are on that paper. There's not a single time when I wouldn't think of if it's 20 people on working with you, then it's 20 people's names that go on that particular project. So I think it's really important for that to occur. And I guess too, one of the interesting things that came up is when you start to work in community, you find these different groups you go to, it's always the same people, especially when we're looking at community groups that are working on reducing inequalities or gender equity or homelessness or these big topics. It's always those same people. So I think that's really crucial to recognise and to be able to expand the network to bring others in. Next slide, please, Bea. This picture, I guess, just represents for me, whilst the Sustainable Development Goals look quite isolated in terms of them being boxes, they are actually so interconnected. And this picture just is from the World Economic Forum publication, and it just represents the challenges in our world and just how interconnected they are. And I think it's a beautiful representation of, even just the current conversation around climate. There's not a single one of us at university that's not researching something that would be linked to climate. There's not a single person in the council that does not doing something that isn't linked to climate. And so I think, as we have our areas of focus or our interests, just understanding how interlinked that is to expand your network and to create these conversations to have bigger impact. Next slide, please, Bea. And I guess for me, I guess I wanted to just bring it back to one of Bruce's points, was around the goals give us a common language through which to start a conversation. And so if you can just reach out and find which goals you align with and find others that have that same drive as you. And for me, I guess my purpose, being on this earth, I guess, is to make this world a better place. And for me, that's by bringing people together to make holistic decisions. And I probably want to leave you with asking yourself, what is your purpose? And I think we have to know our purpose to find people that have the same purpose. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Thank you.
And excellent, Belinda. I think you're answering the question. Would the focus on this be rewarded as what is the focus in terms of being rewarded as an academic? And I think what you've answered the question. It's not I think the reward. It's the purpose that you have been looking at. What I'd like to ask is an earlier question. I think that links for both of you, and because in a way, some of the learning cities we have in conversation have been happening for a long time. You just are starting the process to get to 2024. I thought, oh, aren't you there yet? So I think the interesting bit is part of that effective partnership is finding the right people. Universities are huge. Okay, so are local councils. Okay, I guess the question was, how did you find each other? What was there a partnership broker, or what was it that brought that from? Let's start maybe with Mark. Do you remember? It's like this is one of those questions in a quiz show. Like, what was it that brought you together? So maybe Mark and then Belinda. What is it that if we try the right people, how do you have a sense of that, or have you actually been working with each other even before this formalized? Mark and then Belinda.
Yes, no, not really. It is finding the right person. So we laid the groundwork for probably a year or so before that. My manager and myself trying to get council on board, trying to convince people that this is something we really should be doing, that would benefit the whole community. That maybe 2 decades ago, Wollongong was known as the Steel City. That's no longer the case, really. And should we be focusing on the learning city? So it took a while to get senior managers on board. What on earth is this thing you're talking about? What do you mean? What's it going to do for us? What will it do for our community? And then, of course, the hard part is, could we have some money so that we could fund it and establish a project leader? And really, it was then finding Lara, who came from from Wollongong University. And so her knowledge and her links to the university was really just finding the right person who could forge some of those links, had a foot in the door, if you like, where if it had been led by, I'm not saying this in a horrible way, but if it had been led by someone from within the library family who would be passionate about this, but be in the library sector or the library community and may not have those links. So it was a competitive field, honestly, and it was a very strong field, but we picked a great winner. And with Lara in that role and her links to the university, it's just, the first steps were great. So it is getting buy-in from senior managers at council, and that was difficult. It's getting a little bit of money, that was difficult, and then the recruitment process and finding the right person.
Thank you. So there you are, Lara and Belinda. What brought you into this story?
Thanks, Mark. I guess, yeah, it is so interesting, isn't it? I don't know if there is a right person, but there are multiple people. And I think for me, and I don't want to go on about this purpose business, but for academics is, where do you want to have impact, if I use that word instead? And search for the areas within our local region that also strive to have that impact. So for me, when I was searching around looking at, well, who also is looking at the Sustainable Development Goals in our region, and Healthy Cities Illawarra came up. And I just called the director there and got an introduction from someone through the uni, and found myself there the next day in a meeting with them, and we were just chatting, and they said, well, I have really good links with the council, do you know this person? And I said, no, I don't know that person. And so, yeah, just kind of forged from there. It's just finding, yeah, your people, and those networking opportunities start to evolve.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I think we've squeezed in the question and answer in between, and so I'm sorry to be able to say, but I think most of the questions have been answered. I really appreciate the speakers have been able to answer on the chat, and there was some planning already in collaboration on the side in terms of how do we do a World Cafe, and so I hope that this is an opportunity for you to be able to continue your networking, just to be able to, and then I think there's a demand to get Lara back on, and so I'll pass on to Lara, but before that, just to be able to say from my, it's really been very a fruitful discussion. I really enjoyed facilitating between the different speakers, and just to leave you in terms of, I think one of the things that we talked about in terms of learning partnerships from a university perspective, or from the whole idea of why are we partnering, there's conceptual work in terms of what learning about. The SDGs provides us a clear framework, and Belinda talked about very clearly about that. All of the other presenters identified also the SDGs as the conceptual Okay, but as part of that, yes, the concept needs to find itself rooted in the institution. Mark talked about the challenge of convincing the council, okay, for example, and then Edu talked about convincing the community, for example. So institutionally or collectively, there's a way to be able to talk about the concept, but talk about it in terms of founding it in institutions. But the next question is how. A lot of the partnership people focus on the how of the partnership, but often when we focus on the how, I think what gets lost is the learning that happens through the partnership. And for me, in terms of the concept, let's not forget this is about learning cities. So we are not developing partnerships for the sake of developing partnerships. The partnerships are developed because there's a purpose also in terms of achieving the goals, but also there's a purpose for learning. So how do we make that learning process? And I think tonight or today, you would have heard clearly people talked about what they were doing, but it was not just about what they were doing, but also how they were doing it and how learning was particularly embedded. But I'd like to leave you the thought that yes, in terms of universities and being councils, like where I say I'm in a university, but we all go home somewhere. And so we're also part of the community. So I think it's this whole idea, what hat do we wear? Often we think we're trying to straddle both. And I think this is the whole notion. And I think Bruce started it well, talking of the inside out or the outside in. And sometimes you were, as Mary said, you work from within in. And all that. But I think it's important that wherever inside or outside is, place defines. Place creates context from where we are. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. I'll pass on now. Everybody wants Lara. Thanks, Lara, for being the broker also to hear about you matching the libraries with the universities, and take it on.
Thank you so much, Robbie. You're an amazing facilitator. I've learned so much today. My notes are crazy. There's a lot to take away and digest. So I'd love if you wouldn't mind one last Mentimeter, if you have your phone handy. I think we'd like to get a sense of what are you going to take away from tonight's conversation. Is there any tools or techniques you think you want to try out, over the coming year to improve your own partnerships or to maybe try something new? So, God, where to begin? I like the patchwork quilt so much, Mary, as a kind of analogy and concept, and I love the fact that everyone has managed to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals as a common language, a common lens, which I think is wonderful. Quilting together, that's lovely. Someone's going to visit the library more. Mark, you'll be happy. Anyone else? What are you going to, any tools or ideas?
Diane has asked for the QR code again, Lara.
Oh, sorry. Yep. V, would you mind going back? Thank you. And while this is happening, you all have my email address. I've been in touch with you about this event. And if you'd like to be connected with any of our speakers here today, please don't hesitate to get in touch. If you're also curious to delve deeper into this notion of university partnerships, I too am really curious. So if you'd like to keep the conversation going, please get in touch and let's make that happen. Yeah. Belinda, people love your SDG cafe. Expect an email from the Wyndham, the Wyndham crew.
And while I think just while we're waiting, we should really congratulate the Wyndham crew for being one of the top 10 learning cities as part of the Learning Cities Festival. So a round of applause. Really, you leave your commitment. You leave your commitment, and we're together here today because it's part of the Global Learning Festival that they initiated together with the city of Melton. And so yes, we'll be walking with you also the city of Wollongong. And as you go to 2020, it's too long, 2024. Go.
We're taking our time. We're not rushing. We're not rushing. It's not about the badge. Thank you very much.
You live the spirit already. Yes.
Yes. Over to you, Leonie, whenever you're ready, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lara. What a great conversation we've had tonight, and I'm really excited to see all the conversations going on along the side, as well as the ones that we've listened to. It was a great patchwork quilt, and we all know more about creating a learning society, and we want leaders that will create this learning society for us. And universities and libraries have a great role to play. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, Bruce, Edu, Mary, Mark, and Belinda, for such a thought-provoking webinar. And a warm thank you also to Lara, Robbie and V for collaborating with me in this event together. And also for the audience participation. Even though we rushed all this content in, you've still got your questions in on the side, and I'm really pleased about that. And lots of ideas. If you're interested in finding out more, you'll see that V has put up URLs of our websites, and there is a survey that, V, can you put up that survey to make sure that people can go to the survey and give your feedback on this seminar, and also it's about the Global Learning Festival as well, so please make sure to share your thoughts on the survey, and we're very happy that you came to us tonight, and we hope to hear more from you in the future. Thank you very much. So we'll leave you.